Hello coders, and welcome to another How to Code Well podcast. For those watching on the YouTube channel, you're probably wondering where on earth I am. I'm actually in Miami because I'm attending Sunshine PHP, and you can see here the PHP elephant, Sunny. And I'm also joined by Kat Zieñ.
Hello.
Is that the correct pronunciation?
Almost, it's Zieñ.
Kat did a talk at Sunshine PHP on PHP optimisation and performance, which was fantastic. We're going to be talking about that in just a second. But Kat, introduce yourself and what is it that you do?
So I'm Kat, as Peter said, and I just moved to London 3 months ago. I started a job at Monzo, the bank, on the Fincrime team. So currently I am basically trying to prevent fraud, broadly speaking. And previously I was at Brightpro. I lived in Bristol for about 10 years, and that was mostly a PHP house with bits of Java. And now I'm doing full-time Go.
Wow. So both a Go and a PHP developer with a PHP background. Mm-hmm. Can I ask, what is the benefit of learning two different programming languages for the back end?
Just expanding your toolbox. I mean, it's kind of obvious, but a lot of people forget that. And I think if you get stuck in one language, you just tend to get stuck in just one way of doing things. Yeah. And there is so much more out there. And we see it in the languages themselves. Like, languages borrow ideas from each other all the time. Yeah. So I think if you learn more than one language, you just get a new perspective, a new idea for how to do something. And that's especially visible between PHP and Go, because it's the whole difference is concurrency. Sure. So when I discovered Go and I started learning Go, like the whole world of concurrency and concurrent design just opened up. And I probably, if I stuck to PHP for the rest of my life, I might have never come across it. So
you would recommend Go as a programming language to learn?
Yeah, especially for PHP developers, because like I said, like concurrency is built into Go, it's outright promoted in Go, and we don't see that much in PHP. There is a way to make concurrent programs in PHP, but it's not very widely adopted, it's not very mainstream, so definitely, because it's just so different. It's not that similar to PHP, so it's just a completely new thing.
And you're a co-organiser as well for PHP Southwest and the
London Gophers.
Yeah. So shout out to those organisations. How do you manage your time? Because it sounds like you're incredibly busy, and we are in Miami here. So how do you schedule all the bits and pieces in?
Yeah, I mean, not much free time at the moment, so that's definitely true. I think I've just learned to say no to the things, like you kind of have to be selective at some point. Sure. I think initially anytime you get accepted to a conference, you sort of schedule it in, and I used to do that for a while where I'd say yes to everything, and then I realized it's just a bit too much, so that's one of the reasons why, for example, I haven't looked into getting involved in PHP London, as a co-organizer, for example. Because like as an attendee, it's fine, but if I just sort of said like, yeah, I'll do this and I'll do that and I'll speak at a million conferences, it is tiring, it is close to burnout. So I think just learning to say no and being selective and kind of setting a goal for yourself, and every time an opportunity comes up, just kind of asking yourself, does this bring me closer to my goal? Right. Or is this just like a time filler, or can I be doing something more important?
That's a really good set of recommendations.
It is sad. I hate saying no, but I also can't do anything.
You can't do everything. And it's choosing what you don't want to do. It can be quite difficult. Yeah. So you're a speaker. How many times have you done a talk? What's the?
I haven't counted. I think I've done about 7 conferences last year. Wow. This year, I think I've got about 5 lined up till May. Wow. Deliberately kind of keeping the second year of the second half of this year open. Sure. See what happens. Sure. I've done lots of meetups talks as well. Yes. Probably about 20-30, I think, at this point.
And where are you speaking next?
Next up is PHP UK in a week and a half. Then Confu in Miami. Not in Miami, in Montreal. Right. Then I've got Longhorn PHP in Austin. Possibly .go in Paris, or at least attending, because I've already got a ticket, and I'm attending GopherCon EU as well. Right. Haven't submitted to CFP yet, so we'll see.
That's great. So great.
Good mixture.
Wow. When do you plan all of these things in? Do you do it like 3 months before the conferences happen, or don't
really plan it? I just see things popping up on Twitter and going like CFPs, and I was like, oh great, I've never been to that event. So one of the rules I've kind of adopted is to try and go to events I've not been to before, unless it's like unless it's PHP UK, which is next door, or unless it's just such a good event that I'll happily go next year as well. So I try to sort of keep it diverse and explore new places. Usually it's just looking on Twitter, following the open CFP or whatever the Twitter handle is. There is a Twitter account that basically just reposts any new CFPs open. And kind of then just, if an idea pops up, check the calendar. Can I do it? Can I not?
Right. Excellent. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the talk that you gave at Miami at Sunshine PHP a couple of days ago. PHP performance optimization. I actually saw it. I thought it was really, really good. I learned a lot from that talk.
Thank you.
Let's start by asking a couple of questions. So, for instance, what is the difference between monitoring and profiling?
So the difference is subtle, but they are not synonyms. Monitoring is essentially keeping an eye on things. So it's basically having something look at your app automatically and alerting you if something goes wrong, or just kind of showing you graphs of how your thing is doing, how your app is doing. Yeah. Profiling is just a deliberate act of looking into performance, trying to see how your app, sort of what's the memory consumption, what are the metrics for your app, and then sort of actively maybe trying to reduce that. So monitoring, I'd say, is a little bit more passive. Profiling is just the more active.
Right. Okay. That's awesome. When is the best time to do this? When you're, when, let's say, for example, I have a legacy application, and I wanted to ensure that the new stuff that I add to that legacy application doesn't slow down the existing code. At what point should I be doing this monitoring and profiling?
So I think that overall, if you already had profiling set up, then no matter when you deploy your change, you would then see the difference. And like for a VIP experience, I've seen some companies have deployments correlated to performance graphs. So you can see exactly at the point of deployment, did the graph go up or down or stay the same? Sure. So that's sort of the easiest approach, and that will just happen automatically for you. I think if it's really, really important that the performance doesn't degrade, then in development, like there are lots of tools you can use locally. If you have the option of running your app locally and simulating the production load, then I think locally it's just the quickest feedback. And it's probably better to, especially if you're not sure if your solution is good or not, probably get better to get this feedback earlier rather than when you're ready to deploy.
Well, yeah, I must admit that a lot of things that I've been working on, it's kind of like more of a reactive thing. Okay, so what tools then should PHP developers use to monitor and profile?
I think most PHP developers will already have Xdebug installed, and that's a really, really great tool. Like you can really go a long way with Xdebug, especially on PHP 7, because Xdebug has both the step debugging, all of that built in, as well as profiling information. Okay. As of PHP 7, sort of round about the release of PHP 7. So, so Xdebug goes a long way. Then the other one is XHProf, which there are PHP 7 forks and PHP 5. There is a gazillion of other tools on GitHub. They're mostly kind of made by people, so there are no big companies behind them. Okay. One of my favorite ones is PHP Meminfo, which just gives you a look into your memory and actually see how many objects of every type you have, which is really cool. So I think those are my favorite top 3. And then lots of sort of visualization tools. The one to generate flame graphs is really cool. Right. But I'd say if you had to pick one, it would probably be Xdebug.
Xdebug. And from a Go perspective now, what are the tools available there, and is there any major differences between Go and PHP in terms of performance?
So I think the major difference in terms of tools, the difference is that the profiling tools are built into Go. So when you install Go, you get all the tools installed alongside with it. So there's literally zero setup for yourself, which is great because again, it just outright you kind of have no excuse not to do it because it's all there ready to use. So in Go, there is a tool called pprof, which is kind of the main tool that you would use to look into performance. And that essentially just is built into Go. You just have to set up some endpoints that you can then hit and see like the Go routines that are running and all the data. Sure. And then sort of for things like flame graph, they are all based on the call grind output format, and then flame graphs is a separate thing built by Brendan Gregg. So he has a Perl script that basically takes the call grind format and translates it into flame graphs. Okay. So at that point, sort of the output of both Xdebug and the output of XHProf, can be translated into the format that is then consumed by flame graphs. With Go, again, what you get from pprof can be translated into that. So yeah. And then in terms of performance, the difference is that Go is faster because it's a compiled language, so it will always be naturally faster. PHP is interpreted, so we always have that sort of overhead of interpreting on the fly. So yeah, from my experience, Go does feel a lot faster. But again, depends on what you're doing and what your app is.
Yeah, sure. So in your talk, you mentioned about micro optimizations, and you listed a couple, quite a fair amount actually of micro optimizations. Do you think that they are worth the hassle to just sort of alter the way in which we assign things or the way the statements work? Is that worth the hassle for a couple of milliseconds here and there?
I would say not. Right. I think you should look into them when you have proof that they actually are your bottleneck. I think very often people kind of read about them and they are like, oh, I've swapped the order of variables, I've swapped single quotes for double quotes for single quotes, and I've done my optimization part. And to be fair, you're probably not going to notice the difference. It's negligible. It's going to be negligible. So there's probably a real bottleneck hiding somewhere, and it's very easy to sort of just try and avoid that by. So
the key here is to find the bottlenecks.
Yeah, the key is to have proof that the micro optimizations are actually actually going to make a difference. I think it's worth familiarizing yourself with them, and if you read about them and you know that unless you're concatenating variables, you can use a single quote and it is going to be a few milliseconds faster, I think it's good habits to have as a programmer. So I think you should be aware of those, and I think you should just naturally do the right thing to start with. But if you're working with legacy code and you see something that isn't the perfect way, I think you're probably better off spending time elsewhere, unless you're actually working on this code and you're just swapping it as part of your work.
So what when we're looking at the various tools and the profiling and stuff, what is it that we should be actually looking at? What are the key things that jump out to you when you're doing this?
Genuinely, things that take the longest.
Right. Unless I guess that makes sense, right?
Yeah, unless like if you're looking at the whole app, and for example, you're like, oh, let's try and get the API responses to bring them down a little bit. Then you're obviously going to focus on the part of the API part of your app, and then maybe you already know specific endpoints which you've kind of noticed could be faster, or the ones that you need to make faster. So you might have an intuition for what to look into already. If you don't, if you're just looking at the app and you go, hey, what could I optimize? If you use Xdebug and if you use QCacheGrind on top of it, it will give you the pyramid graph, which will show you what's the sort of the most often found on CPU function, which means most of the time that function was found to be executing when the profiler was running, which kind of gives you an idea of, is this something that I could look at potentially, or is this just naturally a consequence of what the app is doing? So if, like in my example, I used a tool that goes out to the internet and fetches URLs. So after all the optimizations that we've done, the longest taking function was guzzle and curl calls, which is kind of expected. But sometimes you might see something that surprisingly takes a longer time, and you go, I wonder if if that needs to take that long.
Sometimes getting to that point of the guzzle where you're using the libraries actually takes time to discover that the things that you can change.
And another one is flame graphs can also give you an idea for sort of any functions. You can sometimes notice like functions which you would not expect to take long might pop up, and you go, oh, like I wonder why that is.
So we mentioned Xdebug, and in your talk you talked also about XProf. What are the major differences between the two?
So probably it's worth explaining the history very briefly, because that kind of gives you an idea of where they both are these days. In PHP 5 days, Xdebug didn't have any profiling built into it. So if you wanted profiling, you had to use XHProf. And also the major difference is that Xdebug is obviously very, very slow. Like it slows your app down quite a lot, so you should never use it in production. Whereas XHProf and a new kid in town called PHP Spy are now profilers which are advertised from the start to be production safe. So that's the major difference between the two. And then with PHP 7, obviously XHProf was developed by Facebook, and after PHP 7 came out and when Facebook switched to HHVM, they kind of abandoned XHProf.
Okay.
But there was a company called Tideways which took over, and they made a PHP 7 fork, which they've kind of heavily modified, especially the UI, to now be their product. There is a bunch of other people that just took XHProf from 5 and ported it into 7. So these days, and also with the release of PHP 7 and then the corresponding Xdebug release, then Xdebug got profiling built into it. So these days, you can kind of get away with using Xdebug as long as you're okay doing it locally and not in production. If you want to do it in production, XHProf is still the way to go. Okay.
So it's more of a passive. It's less intrusive in terms of putting on production.
It's just got a very, very low sort of overhead of running it, and you can kind of be clever about it, and you can profile every 100th or every 1,000 requests, depending on how many requests your app has.
So flame graphs. In the talk you mentioned flame graphs, and we've mentioned flame graphs here. What are they compared to like where you've got something like K-Cache grind, where you've got the big boxes? What's the difference in representation of a flame graph and that?
So the pyramid graphs, which is the Q-Cache grind graph, it's not interactive. It kind of shows you a similar sort of breakdown of, like, it tries to convey the same information. The difference is flame graphs are interactive, so you can click through them. And when you've got a big app and lots of profiling data, flame graphs, I think, tend to be clearer because you can filter, you can search. Like pyramid graphs, I don't think you can search for a specific function. Whereas with flame graphs, you can actually type in a function that you're interested in a search box, and it will highlight where it is if it's in any of the stack traces. Flame graphs are just sort of interactive, click through, you can invert them, you can sort of do all sorts of things, so they're just a bit more flexible.
Interesting. I must say I haven't used flame graphs before. It's something that I will definitely look into now.
They are not a main tool, I would say. Like, it's not something that sort of it's not going to do the optimization for you. Like, it's not going to help you that much. But I think when you're trying to just understand what your app is doing, the flow, and the flame graphs came about because I think, I don't remember the story exactly, but from what I remember, Brendan had a MySQL extension or something to do with MySQL, and he tried to profile it, and he basically just had all the stack traces, but there were so many of them that he was like, how do I actually group them together? So basically flame graphs is a way of grouping stack traces and sort of putting the same ones in the same bag, and so you get a generic overview of, throughout the duration of profiling, these are the common paths that we found. So it's just a way of aggregating your lots of stack traces.
Lots of stuff. Okay, so in your experience then, what is the biggest performance optimization that you've made, either in PHP or in Go? What's the number one thing that you've done?
So I think it's going to be a funny answer, because the biggest optimization was from switching from PHP to Go. There was, I think, to date, the biggest impact that I've seen was we used to have an old PHP app in my previous job, and that was sort of borderline PHP 4. It was about 2,000-3,000 lines of just procedural PHP that was processing emails. And it was sequential. We would take the email off the POP3 inbox, process it, take the next one. And I think towards the end of its days, it was running with something like 4,000 emails in the backlog. So it was just really slow. And because it was kicked off by a cron job, like the crons started overlapping because the previous run wouldn't finish and then the new cron would be kicked off. So it was just like, it was kind of time to do something about it. And then we thought, because the app didn't have a UI, we could use Go and then process the emails in parallel, because actually there is no need to do it sequentially. They're not related to each other. They can just be done at the same time. And that's essentially what we did. So we literally went from doing the email one by one to just doing, I think, 5 at once. And the backlog just went down immediately. And since then, in the Go app, there was never a backlog. So it's just instant. So I
should really start learning Go.
I really like concurrent programming. It's really cool. And I think these days, like I mentioned in the talk, hardware optimizations is not the major thing anymore that will sort of make your app naturally faster. And even in PHP, like we've already heard that we've kind of reached the limit of how much we can optimize PHP 7. So the language and the hardware are not going to do the job for you anymore. So you as a programmer you have to be clever again about what you do. And so one of the things is if you make your program concurrent, that's naturally utilizing all the cores.
Yeah.
You can literally have a 2-fold, 4-fold increase in your processing. So
Yeah.
I think that is definitely worth looking into.
Wonderful. So, okay, we're in Miami, and it's very sunny. It was raining this morning, and the beach is straight in front of us. So before we hit the beach, is there anything else that you would like to mention? Any social media links or anything else that you wish to plug?
Probably just my meetups, so the ones that I co-organize. So PHP Southwest for the Bristol area. Handle is at PHP Southwest, and London Gophers, obviously in London, at London Gophers on Twitter.
Yep.
And again, we welcome speakers, both new and experienced. We are, especially the PHP Southwest crowd, will provide amazing feedback on Joined In for all of our speakers. We're very, very sort of big on that. So if you'd like to rehearse your talks for conferences, or if you'd like to just get started with public speaking, we're more than happy to give you guidance and coaching, suggest some topics as well. So get in touch. Probably on Twitter is the easiest. Yeah. Get in touch for Southwest or London Gophers.
And if anyone wants to get in touch with you, what's your Twitter handle?
At KASIAZIEN, which is my Polish name.
I'll put this on the screen.
Yeah, it's not the easiest of handles.
And you're talking next at PHP
UK.
PHP UK. Well,
a week and a half.
Wow. Well, congratulations on the talk here at
Thank you.
Sunshine, and good luck for the talk there. Thanks ever so much for watching. Have a good week, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.